Tonight, we are going to try to devise a solution, not necessarily a solution as much as some guidelines into what can be done in the future. Of course, these guidelines are purely theoretical because we don't have a lot of say. And maybe in denominational schools, we can do that. But in terms of the politics of education nationwide, there's not a lot of things you can do. But you can push for the search for truth so that people would find out the truth about origins, not just the idea that is preferable about origins. So tonight I thought we might as well try to review everything we've said throughout the four presentations. So if you remember the first night, we talked about the philosophical basis of evolution. We talked about the difference between facts and interpretation of the fact. That's one of the keys in understanding the issue of origins. A lot of times scientists say evolution is a fact, and they point, for example, to the genetic resemblance between between humans and animals. That indeed is the fact. Now, why is that resemblance? Is it because of evolution or because of somebody made it that way? That is the interpretation. And the thing is that evolution, and this way we come to the second point, evolution excludes one option from the start, solely on philosophical grounds, on a philosophical basis. Evolutionists do not like the idea of a creator because they say that's not scientific, so they exclude that from the start. But then again, evolution is different than the other sciences. Evolution is a historical science. It has a different methodology. It's not like the experimental sciences that have immediate confirmation. And we used, for example, gravity. Okay, we study gravity, we don't understand it very well, but we see it. You can see gravity happening now. Whereas evolution, you do not see happening now. At most, you can observe the effects of evolution, but you cannot see it happening now because by definition, evolution happens on a long period of time. Okay? And the last thing that we discussed is another thing that they present as fact are just unwarranted extrapolations. For example, we talked about the beaks of finches in the Galapagos Island, how they changed over time, but that is not evolution. That is at best microevolution, but it's not even that, because they are the same species of finches. When the rain came back, the sizes of the beaks went back to normal. So there was nothing there, just unwarranted extrapolation from a small change to a big change. So that was the first lesson. Our second lesson, we discussed about abiogenesis, the origin of life. And while it is true that scientists say that abiogenesis is not evolution, they say evolution can happen independently of this topic, even if the origin of life, if some supernatural being might have had something to say in the origin of life, the reality is they never talk about that. They always talk about the natural origin of life. There is no talk of a supernatural in sciences. So we still need to discuss abiogenesis. Okay? And the reality is that scientists do not know how life appeared. They have theories. They have hypotheses. They have different ideas about how different parts might have been formed, but they have no clue. They don't know. Because even the simplest cell is more complicated than anything humans have ever created. So a naturalistic theory of origins needs to explain that. And the most scientists have been successful in doing is, if ever, is just building the building blocks. And if you remember the Miller-Urey experiment, where he had a mixture of gases, a spark, and he created some amino acids, but not all of them, and they were left-handed and right-handed, so he wasn't even able to create that perfectly. Not to mention that he used an atmosphere that geologists today say was not the primordial atmosphere. Okay, and then we can talk that there's no success for the natural origin of macromolecules and organelles, which is even more complicated than the building blocks. When we get to the last part, which is the most important, information, that is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. Information is, by definition, a convention. Somebody has to assign meaning to it. I mean, the simple chains of amino acids don't mean anything if there isn't a machine to interpret that. A machine who needs, a molecular machine who reads it, translates it, copies it, and then follows the instructions. But that's just a convention. It's nothing natural happening naturally there. So the way we know information until this point, only intelligence can create information. Now, of course, that is not accepted in the sciences because intelligence would mean a creator. A creator is still not accepted. So they still say, well, we don't have all the answers, but in the future we will find out. And that's true. But then you cannot say that you've proved the natural origin of life. You cannot say that. You can say you expect to prove it in the future, but you did not do it today. So that you cannot say. After that lesson, we went to the next one in which we talked about the complexity of life. We talked about evolution per se, how that happens. And we talked about how evolution, we cannot describe evolution as just change over time or descent with modification because that is confusing. We're not talking about that. What we are talking about is the development of all life from the simplest form of life through mutation and natural selection. And we showed that these two elements are incapable of providing, of making evolution function because mutations never provide new information, new positive information. They at best can combine what exists. They do not create new information, mutations. And natural selections, again, doesn't create anything. Natural selection just eliminates the bad. It does not create anything new, anything good. So the task of creation is left to mutations. But as we've seen, scientists do not know of any positive mutation, a mutation that creates information. So again, scientists do not have the mechanism of evolution. That doesn't mean that God created the world. It doesn't automatically mean that. What it means is that scientists need to believe in evolution, that evolution is true, because they didn't prove it. There's no proof. But they will believe it is, and they will act as if evolution is true, and all the experiments and everything are based on the fact that evolution is true, and the experiments are successful, and they find out a lot of things, a lot of new things, but there is no independent confirmation because they're just based on an idea that is not proven. Then the last thing we discussed is irreducible complexity, which again, some evolutionists do not accept, but they do not accept by faith because they say it can't be that way. Because if it is that way, evolution is not true, and we just know evolution is true. They do not reject it on the basis of the fact. But the fact is that there are systems in cells that are irreducibly complex. That means if you take one part, the system breaks down. We used the example of the bacterial flagellum, and some evolutionists say, well, that might have been developed through natural selection from a type 3 secretory pump, which is similar to the flagellum. The problem is that pump that scientists identified has a complex of 20-something proteins, whereas the flagellum has 40-something proteins. So how do you get from 20 proteins of a functional mechanism to 40 proteins in the functional mechanism just by adding 1 and 1 and 1 and 1? If you do that, you lose the first function before being able to meet the second one. So if you break a system that is working, natural selection would have no reason to select it because there's nothing to select for. There's no function. It was a pump that was functioning, now it's broken, and now we're just waiting for evolution to evolve all the 20 parts until it becomes a flagellum. Or you need to show that every intermediate step has a function. But that function needs to translate from a pump to a motor. And if you show that, okay, I'm going to buy it. But until now, nobody was able to show it. The question is, isn't that God of the gaps? Which means, you know what God of the gaps means? When we don't know something, we just say, God did it. Well, it's not the same thing, because with biology, because that's where the problem is, with biology, the more you study about life, the more mysteries you find out. It's not as the more you study, the more you find answers. No, in biology, the more you study, the more you find questions. So the more you dig, you find more and more complexity until you're not able to have any answers. So the fact that intelligent design movement suggests that there is a designer, somebody who created everything, is just an inference from best explanation. We know that only intelligence is capable of creating information. We do not know of any natural phenomenon capable of producing information. Okay, then last week we went a little bit into creationism and the Bible, and we talked about the age of the earth and the universe, and I showed that Genesis 1 verse 1, when it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, doesn't necessarily talk about the whole universe. It might just talk about what they knew at that time, the solar system. They saw the moon, the sun, the earth, and they saw the stars, but they believed the stars were local. So when God says there in Genesis 1:1 that he created the heavens and the earth, that doesn't necessarily mean the whole universe as we know it, because they did not know that universe. They had no idea that universe was that big. They had no idea that our galaxy alone, they had no idea what galaxy means, that our galaxy alone has hundreds of billions of stars, and that there's like trillions of galaxies like our own in the whole universe. They had no idea about that. So God didn't explain to them modern astronomy because it wasn't useful to them at that time. They just needed to know that God made everything. So God might have said, okay, see everything? I made this. It's not important the rest, because you're not going to know anything anyways at this point. Okay? Then we talked about how the Bible never teaches that the earth is 6,000 years old. It is not the intent of any part of the Bible to teach us that. That is just some calculations that some people made based on the numbers that they had in the Bible. But never is the intent of any text to teach us that the earth is 6,000 years old. However, from the text of the Bible, we can infer that life on earth is fairly recent. We cannot know a number because there's 3 major versions of the Bible, and each have their own numbers. So we cannot know which one is the correct, the original one. Some say it's the Masoretic text, some say it's the Septuagint, some say it's the Syriac, but we don't know. So generally, creationists would go and say that the earth, which I don't necessarily agree with, is less than 10,000 years old. What I can agree with is that life on earth is fairly recent. How recent? We don't know that exactly either, because the Bible never tells us that. Okay, might be less than 10,000 years old. We can go with that. Then we discussed about we don't actually need long time for what we see in the geologic column. The only reason why science insists on deep time, on millions and millions of years, is that is needed for evolution. They need long time for evolution because evolution does not work on a short term. It needs to have a long time. The problem is the time that we have is not even close of the time that is necessary for things to evolve. And there was a conference back in the 60s where biologists and mathematicians gathered together so that they can form some mathematical models of how evolution happened. And the mathematicians and statisticians say it's not enough time. We don't have enough time to evolve all that we have. It's just not even close. You know what the response of biologists was? You must be wrong because evolution is true. So if you don't even believe math, what are you going to believe? You must be wrong. Your calculations must be wrong because we know evolution is true. Now, if you start like that, it is obvious that nothing is going to convince you that evolution is not true. Because whatever proof comes your way, you're just going to say you're wrong because evolution must be true. Why? Because we don't like the alternative. But what we want to find out is the truth. It's not something that we like or we don't like. We need to follow the truth wherever it leads us. If it leads us to a materialistic universe in which there is no God, then we need to follow the truth. But then again, if it leads us into a universe that seems to have been created by a creator, we need to follow the truth. The truth does not care if we like it or not. The truth is truth. You might not like the truth, but it's still the truth. So that's the whole point. If you reject something on a philosophical ground, you can do that. But then you cannot say that you've proved it. What you can say is that you like the idea so much that there's nothing that can determine you not to believe it, and that makes it unscientific. Because if something is scientific, it needs to be able to be refutable, to be able to be proven false. Okay? So we discussed why a long time is not needed, because fossils and oil do not need a long time to form. In the geologic column, we see the stasis as norm. Stasis is the fact that in the geologic column, you see fossils appear abruptly. They remain unchanged throughout the period that they stay in the geologic column and disappear abruptly. So that is the norm. There is a very conspicuous lack of change in the geologic column. Of course, there are some fossils that can qualify as being missing links, and we didn't have time to discuss those. There's a very good book by Jonathan Wells who discusses some of them. He has a book, Icons of Evolution. Of course, evolutionary scientists do not accept that book because they say, you must be wrong because evolution is true. Again, the same philosophical argument. There's no actual real argument here. Then there seemed to be some proof for the rapid deposition of the geologic column because there's lack of erosion between layers. So you don't have relief forms in the layers. They're all parallel. You only have erosion at the top, which seems to suggest that the geologic column was deposited rapidly, okay? And the last mentioned is, given all that, we still need to learn to live with uncertainties because we do not have answers to all the problems. We still do not know why the fossils seem to be arranged sequentially from the least advanced to the most advanced. That seems to be the norm, and we don't have a convincing answer as to why radiometric ages seem to give consistent older ages as we go down. There's not a good answer to that, but it's fine because everybody has mysteries, and it's part of the maturity of faith to learn to live with uncertainties because you have enough evidence to base your system on, and whatever answer you don't have, you hope that in the future you will solve. That's how science works too. They say, we don't have all the answers, we hope that in the future we'll be able to solve them. It's the standard answer for the origin of life, and even if it is not acknowledged, it is the standard answer for evolution. So that was what we discussed so far. And for tonight, in short words, I would like to discuss what is the solution. So what are we to believe? How are we to act? Because basically, we do not have a lot of options. These are our options, starting from the youngest to the oldest. Young Earth creationism, old earth creationism, intelligent design, theistic evolution, and evolution. So the two extremes are young earth creationism and evolution, and everything that comes in between is maybe a combination of the two, not necessarily. Okay, so the order is not the perfect order, but I just had to put them in an order. Okay, so what is young earth creationism? What is the source of authority in young earth creationism? It is the Bible. When was the universe created? The young earth creationism doesn't necessarily address that, although some branches do, but the Bible doesn't talk about that. When was the earth created? Again, the Bible does not talk about that. The Bible just talks about life. That's the most important part. When it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, we do not know when that beginning was, and we do not know exactly what it means. Does it mean the whole universe, or does it just mean the solar system? I care to suggest that by the way inspiration and revelation functions, that is, it relates to the present level of knowledge, when God talks in the Bible about the heavens and the earth, it talks just about the local solar system, because in that time, there was no knowledge of a vast universe, okay? Now, the problems that we have as young earth creationism, can we prove the flood? You cannot necessarily prove that God made a flood, but we can maybe find proof that the whole earth seems to have been flooded by water at a point in time. And there are creationist scientists who discovered what seemed to be worldwide currents. His name is Arthur Chadwick from Geoscience Research Institute, and he published some work on that. In the work that he published, he never mentioned the word flood or God, because you cannot prove that from science. From science, you can look at the clues. Now, how you interpret the clues, that's the other story. But everybody has to interpret the data. The data doesn't come with a story. The data is just the data. Now scientists have the task of interpreting it. And then, of course, we need to talk about the challenges to the flood model that exist. Yeah, are there layers that cannot be formed in water? Are there layers of deposit that seem to have formed as aerial deposits instead of water deposits? You have to be able to address all those things. Why does it seem to be a sequence in the fossils? Why do ages seem to be older as you go down in the fossil record? Those are challenges that we still haven't answered. Now, when you go to old earth creationism, okay, they don't have all those problems, because old earth creationism says that God created life a long time ago, and the record of life that we have in the geologic column is just a natural record of life. Okay? They believe God destroyed life, and Genesis 1 talks about the second creation of life. Most old earth creationisms do that. But then you have the problem of death before sin, which is clearly something that is against the Bible, because the Bible mentions that death came through sin into the world. Although some theologians interpret that only refers to humans, but the text doesn't say that. The text says in Romans that the whole nature was corrupted by the sin of humans. So it doesn't fit with the Bible, and it's still creationism. So it's still not accepted by science, because it still has a God. Then when we go to intelligent design, with intelligent design, you have the advantage that it explains the problem of information. And because we know that only intelligence can create information. The problem is you cannot see through science who that designer is, but that is not a problem. That's not a problem. That's actually, in my opinion, a strength of intelligent design, because you could just discuss in science classes if the world was if the world evolved or was created, who that creator was, why he created. If there's a theological plan, that doesn't come into the science class, because that's one of the problems. When they discussed about teaching creationism in school, the opposition, especially the ACLU, said that, see, this is, goes against the First Amendment, separation of church and state. You cannot mix them, and that's partially true. I mean, in In schools, in public schools, you have kids of all religions. And if you are to teach the Christian religion as stately endorsed, then that would seem to go against the First Amendment, because there are Muslims and they need to learn that Christianity is the true religion in a public school. Okay? And the public school system tries to avoid that, to present any one religion as being the true. I can relate to that. But that's why I say intelligent design has the advantage of not presupposing the identity of the creator. The identity of the creator can be whoever you want. You're a Buddhist, it can be your Buddha. You're a Muslim, it can be your Allah. That's not the point. The point is, when we look at the evidence, what does the evidence say? Does it say that we evolved, or does it say that we were intended, created by somebody? It might even be, for the non-religious people, as I said last time, it can even be a very advanced alien civilization. Now, how that alien civilization appeared, that's a different question, but we're just talking about Earth. The problem with intelligent design is that it doesn't explain the geologic column. It doesn't have a theory for that. It doesn't know how to relate to that, because it doesn't care about the age. So that's a weakness of intelligent design. It needs to have a system to explain the geologic column. They don't even try to do that. I want to go to this. The problem with intelligent design is that critics say they have an agenda. And the intelligent design movement has an agenda to put creationism back into schools. Well, first of all, that's false. That is not their agenda. Even if they have a document that says the wedge, that the ID is the wedge, but ID is the wedge not to push back creationism, but to push back the truth. And the thing is, everybody has an agenda. I have an agenda. Yeah, everybody has an agenda. My agenda is to discover the truth. That's what I say. I need to know the truth. Your agenda as a scientist is to discover the truth. The only problem is that you do not accept one explanation from the start. So basically, you only want, in my opinion, you only want half the truth. You're not willing to accept the whole truth. You're not willing to go where truth leads you. So the fact that ID has an agenda, that's inconsequential. Everybody has an agenda. The problem is it true or not? And ID, intelligent design, is not creationism. As I said, the identity of the creator cannot be established through science. A proponent of the ID movement would never say in a classroom, this is the God of the Bible, because they cannot prove that. In the classroom, they will say, we'll look at the evidence, and it seems to point that we were rather created. By whom? We don't know. And very interestingly, have you ever heard of Pastafarianism or the flying spaghetti monster movement? So you see this photo here? See, this is a mock of the creation by Michelangelo. You know, that's instead of God, we have a flying spaghetti monster. This movement, the flying spaghetti monster, that's very funny. Some would say it's irreverent, but it's funny. Let's be honest. They said they created that as a mockery to intelligent design. Because they say, if you want to teach intelligent design in the classroom, we want to teach the flying spaghetti monster theory in the classroom too. Because we believed we were created by a flying spaghetti monster. And our religion is called Pastafarianism. And our religious attire is a colander that they wear on the head. And they even try to have official documents with that. Of course, this is all a mockery. But you know what the beautiful thing is? According to intelligent design, theoretically, the creator can be the flying spaghetti monster. Because that's not the point. The creator can be anyone. A proponent of the intelligent design movement doesn't want to establish the identity of the creator in the science classroom because they say we cannot figure that out through science. That is why when we discuss the science of origins, we need to involve philosophy too. So, after we discuss the fact that if we've been created or not, if in the philosophy class you wish to argue your position of the flying spaghetti monster, you're most welcome to do that. But you'll be eaten alive, of course, in the philosophy class, because you have no chance with the flying spaghetti monster in the philosophy class, because everybody knows it's a made-up movement. Very interestingly, this very week, they asked for recognition in Germany as a religion. And the Supreme Court in Germany said, no, it is obviously a joke. You do not get recognition as a religion. You are not a religion. You are just some made-up nonsense. So they did not get the same treatment as in the US. Europe is different with that. They don't deal with nonsense like that. They say, no, this is nonsense. This is made up. So you don't get recognition as a religion. Here, all the crazies can get recognition for their religion. But that's the thing. That is what I believe the advantage of the intelligent design movement. It can bring to the table the idea of a creator without being denominational. It's just two basic ideas. Did we evolve or were we created? And we should be able to discuss that in the science classroom. Because when we talk about origins, it's a unique, unrepeatable event. We need to be able to discuss that. And I'm going to repeat this. As far as the identity of the creator, we're going to discuss that in the philosophy class or religion class. We're not in the science. But in the science class, we need to be able to bring both options to the table. If you're not going to bring one option, then the discussion is skewed. You might miss the whole truth. That is why I believe the intelligent design movement is the best way to do that. Now, what about theistic evolution? The reality is that most theologians today believe in theistic evolution. They do not believe in creation anymore. And this is a statement by Pope Francis, and he said, when you read about creation in Genesis, we run the risk of imagining God was a magician with a magic wand, able to do everything. But that is not so. He created human beings and let them develop according to the internal laws that he gave to each one so they would reach their fulfillment. God is not a magician, but the creator who brought everything to life. Evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. So I'm asking now, maybe theistic evolution is a solution to our problem. Since we see that evolution on itself doesn't work, maybe if we believe in theistic evolution, then we can keep both the science part and the Bible part. Well, before addressing that, I want to address one thing that Pope Francis says. He said here, when we read about creation in Genesis, we'll run the risk of imagining God was a magician with a magic wand able to do everything. Well, that is a very mistaken way of interpreting Genesis. Nobody believes God is a magician. Miracles in the Bible are not magic. Some people seem to think that. Some people seem to put the equal sign between miracles and magic. And because we know magic doesn't exist, therefore miracles don't exist. But I want to suggest a different interpretation of miracles, okay? So people seem to think that the natural and supernatural are like this. We have the natural, we see the natural exist, and that's the supernatural, which we know it doesn't exist because it's outside natural, okay? That seems to be the suggestion. I would care to suggest a different option of viewing things. I suggest that the natural is part of the supernatural. Let me explain. The natural is what we know now of the natural law. The supernatural is all the other laws that we do not know that God knows. For example, in the 1900s or earlier than that, objects heavier than air could not fly. It was a given law. Okay, they say we cannot fly. The most they could do is fly with hot air balloons because hot air expands. It has less mass in the same volume, and according to the law of Archimedes, it will be pushed up. And it could draw up something with it, a basket with humans, okay? That's why they say objects heavier than air, because hot air is lighter than air. So they can do that. But nothing heavier than air could fly. Okay, that was the natural. If you care to imagine, if they would have seen, if people in the Middle Ages would have seen a Boeing 777, as I saw today from Emirates, the direct flight from Dubai to Fort Lauderdale as driving up I-95, they would have said it's a miracle. What is that? It's a metal bird. They wouldn't have even know how to describe it because they didn't know the laws that govern its function. But then, some guys discovered the laws of aerodynamics. And they realized that if you have a wide enough surface that drives with enough speed, and that surface is slightly bent upwards, you will take height. That's what they discovered. And when they first started to fly, they pulled that with horses, with something, because they needed enough speed, and that plane needed to be very, very light, because they didn't know, they couldn't create enough lift. But as science evolved, as science discovered more and more principles, they realized how to build planes. So basically, our knowledge of the natural expanded. Or for example, natural course of events, lead doesn't normally transform into gold. You know, this has been the quest of alchemists for centuries. They wanted to transform lead into gold until they said, it's impossible, it's a myth, no, that doesn't happen. Well, interesting enough, you can do that today. Transform lead into gold. The only problem is it will cost several $1 million for just a 1 gram or 2 of gold, so it's not feasible. They can do that in large, what's it called? Hadron colliders, the particle accelerators. They can do that because they discovered the laws of particle physics, of nuclear physics, and they realized that you can transform one into another, but you just need a lot of energy to transform a little bit of lead into a little bit of gold. So it's not feasible, but you can do it. Why? Because we've just expanded our natural knowledge. Maybe things, for example, how God stopped the sun in what's his name? Joshua's time. Well, actually, he did not stop the sun, but he just explained that to Joshua because he didn't know better. He might have stopped the earth, but I think he didn't even stop the earth. He did something else. This is just a presupposition. What I'm saying is, the way we know time, space today, we know time and space are relative. This is what Albert Einstein showed. Until Albert Einstein, people knew that space is absolute and time is absolute. I mean, it's the same wherever you go. Well, that's not the case. He showed that's not the case. Time and space are relative. And time, theoretically, can be slowed down if you have enough energy or enough mass or enough speed. We don't have the technology to do that. But maybe God has access through himself to laws of nature that are known to us, and he can slow down time. And maybe upon that valley, he just created a space-time field in which time flowed slower, because he could just do that, because he has access to laws of nature that we do not have. Now, the thing is, we can do some of the things that God can do through technology, but God does it through himself. And there's always many laws that we do not know. That's why the supernatural is always bigger than the natural, because there's always laws that we will find out. Okay? And this is science, that's how science progresses. But what I'm trying to suggest is all the miracles in the Bible are done according to laws of nature. Some of them we have discovered, some of them we haven't. So when the Pope talks about magic in Genesis, that's not how we interpret it. God did not create through magic. Now, having gotten that out of the way, let's assess theistic evolution a little bit and then try to bring this whole thing to an end. I know there's so many things we haven't discussed, but there's only so much you can discuss in 5 sessions of 45 minutes each. Then you have the possibility to ask questions. So let's look at theistic evolution. Well, first of all, theistic evolution is logically inconsistent, because it is a contradiction in terms. Why? Because evolution is defined as an undirected process. You add God, what do you get? A directed, undirected process. It's an oxymoron. You cannot have a directed, undirected process. Either God directed it, so then it's not undirected and it's not evolution, or God didn't direct it, but then why do you put God in the picture? So some theistic evolutionists believe he created matter and the laws and allowed it to function. Some other theistic evolutionists believe he just created the laws and allowed matter to appear on its own. Either way, it's still directed because God created the laws at the beginning. It cannot be an undirected, directed process. It's a contradiction in terms. Then, theistic evolution is still incompatible with science because it still has the same shortcomings of evolution. Mutation and natural selection don't work, as we discussed some lessons ago. The only reason they're accepted is that they don't have a better answer. And they say, that's the best answer we have. Well, it's fake, it's false, it's not a good answer. So theistic evolution is also incompatible with science because mutation and natural selection don't work. Theistic evolution is not supported by the Bible. Okay? People who believe in theistic evolution say that through this they marry science and the Bible. The problem is not the Bible we know, because never in the Bible you have God allowing nature to form itself. Always in the Bible, God forms the nature. God forms waves, wind, seas, mountains, everything. You don't see anywhere in the Bible God allowing nature to create itself. That doesn't exist because nature doesn't have free will. One of the reasons people suggested natural theistic evolution is because they say it allows freedom to nature. But the problem is nature doesn't need freedom. It's humans who need freedom, not nature. So it goes against the Bible. Theistic evolution does not support the problem of evil. That's one of the other things that theistic evolution is suggested for, because they say if God didn't create the world, then evil exists because it's just embedded in the natural laws. But that doesn't absolve God of the guilt, because he created some laws which he knew will create evil. So he's still responsible. Even if he did not create evil directly, he's still responsible because he created a process through which evil existed. If he intended to create through evolution, that means that death is part of God's process. Death, because death is a part of evolution. You know, the undeveloped beings need to die so that the most fit organism live. Well, that's again contrary to the Bible, because in the Bible, death is always the enemy. Death is never a helper. Death is never God's way or God's method. It is always the enemy that will, that will be destroyed at the end. So it doesn't solve the problem of evil, and again, it contradicts the Bible. And the last point for theistic evolution, it redefines completely the problem of sin, salvation, and redemption. Traditionally, sin is understood as a fall from the grace of God in the Garden of Eden when humans chose to go away from God's law. Okay, and then sin came, death came, and God came with the plan of redemption. Now, if there's no primordial perfection, what is sin? What does sin mean? If humans were formed after hundreds of years of evolution from some primates that resemble to apes today, when did sin appear? What does sin mean? What does redemption mean? Why did Christ have to die? There are answers to that according to theistic evolution, but there are a very harsh reinterpretation of everything. One theologian, John Polkinghorne, he says that sin is the turning away of humanity from God onto itself. What does that even mean? When did that happen? How did that happen? When did human beings become conscious? It creates a whole array of problems, and it needs to reinterpret the whole Bible. So it renders Christ's sacrifice effectively useless, because if there's no perfection, there's no sin. If there's no sin, no salvation. Why did Christ die? So it doesn't have this part of the Bible either. So now we get to the last part. What should we do? What should we teach in science classes? I would militate for an openness in the science class, not to any denominational theology. That's not the point. Because the science class needs to be about science, not about religion. I agree, I totally agree with that. I just have two things. The science of origins is different. It's a historical science. And the science of origins needs to have philosophy, because the science of origins deals with things that are not accessible through science. How are you going to discover non-space? How are you going to study non-space? Because that's what Big Bang says. The Big Bang theory says that there was no space and time, and all of a sudden, from non-space time, which we have no idea what it means or how that acts, space and time and matter appeared. But all we have now is space-time. So how are you going to study non-space-time? You don't even know how that looks like. So the only way to analyze that is through philosophy. You just give some opinions of what you think it might look like. But the whole point is you cannot study it through science. So you need philosophy to study. So that's the first thing. The science of origins is different. It's not like all the other sciences. And the other thing is, it's just a binary option. We're not talking about the flavors of different religions. We're not talking about Buddhism. We're not talking about Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and all that. No, we're not talking about that. In a science classroom, we should discuss this idea when we're talking about origins. What does the evidence show? Does the evidence show that we evolve naturally? Okay, then that's what the science shows. Or does the science show, rather, that we were created? It jumps from the evidence. But the problem is, today in science classes, you cannot ask that question. Today in science classes, there's only one option, that we appeared naturally. And the other question is taboo. You cannot ask it. If you do it as a teacher, you might get fired. Or your school will get sued by the ACLU, and you'll get fired. So it's the same idea. I envision a time where people would shed their fears and will be open enough, and there are some parts of the world when they do that, not in the States apparently for now. It was a very interesting anecdote that Stephen Meyer tells in his book, in the book Darwin's Doubt, when he talks about a Cambrian explosion. He talks about a paleontology conference in the United States where a Chinese paleontologist was invited. He started to talk about evolution and started to criticize evolution and criticize Darwin. No problem. And at the question and answers, everybody started raising their hand. What is going on? Why are you criticizing Darwin? How can you say that? Don't you realize that by this, you invite religion into science? And he said something very interesting. He said, in China, we are not allowed to criticize the government, but we can criticize Darwin. In the United States, you can criticize the government, but you cannot criticize Darwin. So where's the democracy and where's the dictatorship? In science today, there is a complete dictatorship in terms of Darwinism. You cannot say anything against Darwinism because you're a heretic and you're taken out. So in the science class, we should only teach what is observed through science. And through science, we can observe that intelligence is the only source of information. You do not have any natural process that is able to create information because, by definition, information is arbitrary. It's a convention. It is something that somebody assigns to something, a meaning. As I showed you the letters, it can be gibberish or it can be a message, depending on somebody who, or the person who created the message, the information. For information to be relevant, you need to be able to understand that information, to read it, to translate it, or that requires intelligence. By definition, I would say, naturalistic scientists would not agree with me, but would not agree with me on philosophical grounds, not on scientific grounds. They don't agree with me because they say it's the only way. You're wrong because evolution must be true. Well, I say, let's put it to the test. See, is it wrong or is it right? And then I would say that philosophy classes should teach about what kind of a creator that could be. We cannot talk about the identity of the creator in the classroom, in the science classroom. In the philosophy class, we need to be able to discuss atheism. Yeah, we need to talk about that. Why we as Christians don't believe in atheism, but what are the strengths of atheism? For example, one of the biggest problems of Christianity and the biggest strengths for atheism is the problem of evil. We do not have a complete solution to that. We do have one. It's a religious, theological, philosophical one, but it's not everybody accepts it. Now, atheism seems to make a lot of sense. We see a lot of evil in the world. If there were a God, he would have eradicated the evil. There is still evil, therefore there's no God. Okay, it seems to make sense. However, I can live with a philosophical uncertainty, the problem of evil. I prefer to live with a philosophical uncertainty, the problem of evil, than with a mathematical improbability, if not even impossibility. Because mathematically, information cannot appear through natural processes. Maybe we find an answer to the problem of evil, maybe we don't. But that's a philosophical uncertainty, and I can live with that. But I cannot live with a mathematical impossibility. It's right there, staring at you in the face. Mathematically, information can only be devised by intelligence. So I repeat that. I'd rather live with a philosophical uncertainty than with a mathematical improbability, if not even impossibility. As a conclusion, all models have shortcomings. We do not have a perfect model. So we need to learn to live with our uncertainties. But of all the models, in terms of science, intelligent design is the least philosophically charged model of the atheist persuasion. Even if it believes in a creator, it doesn't necessarily have to be God. I believe is God, but by science I cannot show that. By science I can only show that it is more likely that we have a creator than not. So science classes should be about origins. Science class about origins should be supplemented with philosophy classes about origins. But science classes should be about discovering the truth, not about supporting one philosophically cherished idea, that of atheism. Science classes should be about discovering the truth wherever it leads us. And science classes about origins are different. And the last point I would say for people of faith, do not lose faith. Even if we don't have all the answers, experience has showed that God always vindicates people who believe in him. In the end, we will have the answers. Not now, but in the end, we will have all the answers. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions about what we presented tonight. I know it has been, and I think I want to thank my translators. One of them is here tonight, Rodika, and the other one is not, Juana. I know I have put them to test because sometimes I talk very fast and I get into that mode when I cannot stop, so they did a great job, so thank you, Rodika and Juana. I know it has been a lot tonight, but if there's any question about what I've said, feel free to ask it, and I'll try to answer it as best as I can.
Do you know what religion was taken out of schools and why?
I don't know particularly here in the United States. I think it was sometimes in the 60s, but I'm not sure exactly when. And it was because one of the decisions of the Supreme Court interpreted that prayer in schools and teaching Bible in public schools would go against the First Amendment. And I think it was in the 60s, but I'm not exactly sure when. We could look into that. If anybody knows better. I think it was in the 60s, as a result of one of the Supreme Court's rulings about that. But I think, contrary to what many Christians believe, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, you know? Because you have so many people of so many religions in schools that doing it, like, for example, is done in Romania, where one religion is presented as the truth at the detriment of the others. I think that it might do much worse than just not having it. What I would like to see is an opening to the idea of the religion. That's what I do not see. Now I see the reverse. you see militant atheism pushed, and that's again a religion. So you discarded of the religion of Christianity, but you put in the religion of militant atheism. That is what I do not like. What I would like to see in the public schools is an openness to all religions. Okay, let's discuss them. Let's discuss them. Let's just not reject completely the idea of religion. Everybody who believes in religion is stupid. Only atheists are smart. That's the whole point in public schools, and I do not like that. I resent that. Yes, Sebi.
Personally, I would disagree with the last comment of Romania and the American.
Yeah, of course.
I think that Romania is like more like ethnically homogeneous nation in percentage-wise, who more like 80 to 90%
90%.
government of the people identify as a type of Christian religion, so I don't see a problem with that push. But I did want to ask, you mentioned that atheistic values are pushed through the American system in science. Why would that be the case? What's the reason behind that?
I wouldn't know what's the reason behind that. I'm not particularly aware of any conspiracy to do that. I just believe that most people like the idea of atheism better than theism because it makes them only accountable to themselves. So they don't, because they like that. They like the theory of evolution because it supports atheism. So they're not going to consider any other theory because they just like the implications. But that's not the role of science. When you see so much proof that evolution does not seem to be the correct answer, if you consider everything, then you need to ask the question, maybe we were created. Maybe. We need to at least be able to consider that. I'm not saying about teaching creationism in science classes. I don't particularly agree with that because I don't think you can do that. For example, until Darwin, scientists believed that species are fixed. And they believe that the Bible teaches that. But the Bible doesn't teach that. But here you have a wrong scientific principle that those people believed, and they pushed it. So if you teach biblical creationism in science classes, you might run that risk. What I would like to see in the science class is an openness to discuss the design hypothesis. That's what I would like to see, an openness. Don't reject it automatically, because you reject it on philosophical grounds. And when we talk about Christianity, don't just reject it automatically. Well, let's talk about Christianity. We can talk about Islam. That's fine. I think the American school system should use talking a little bit about Islam because there's a lot of prejudices about Islam and about some other religions. So we need to be able to have the maturity to talk about each other's faith systems, even in the public school. I still believe I'm right, and they might believe they are right. But if we don't talk about it, how are we going to grow? So that's what I'm saying. The only thing I would like to see is an openness, okay, to the idea of religion, and to be able to discuss that in philosophy classes, in religion classes, and in the science class, in the science of origins. We're not talking about mathematics. We're not talking about physics. We're not talking about chemistry, because in chemistry, evolution doesn't matter. Sulfur will react with water and create sulfuric acid, even if you believe in evolution or in creation or not. Science will just act normally. You don't have to believe in evolution to be a good chemist, or to be a good metallurgist, or to be good particle physics. It's not important for those fields of science. When we talk about the science of origins, that's where we should be able to be open to the idea of a creator, whoever that might be. I believe it's God, but whoever that might be. Please. Yes.
Like you just said that in chemistry, physics, origin shouldn't really matter.
It doesn't.
Yet growing up here and going to school here, every professor that I had, every beginning of a science book, no matter what it is, mentions the Big Bang as the origin of all matter, and so it correlates. It goes like, because of that, that's the origin where all these elements come from.
Yeah. So you say all science textbooks, chemistry, physics, they talk about the Big Bang. and how that's the origin of elements. And that's true. But you see, this is talking about the origin. Whatever you believe about the origin, if you believe that they were created by a turtle by puking them, whatever, they still react today. So their origin is irrespective to what happens today. However, last time I talked a little bit about Big Bang Theory, not the show, the actual theory, and I said that the Bible doesn't talk about that. We do not know how God created the universe. The universe is big enough, and I don't think God created every particle at its right place, because light has to travel from a star to here. And if you see a supernova like 50,000 light years away, that means it's 50,000 years in the past. So what? Did God create the light in transit? Or did God create the star and allowed light to travel to us for 50,000 years? So we don't know how God created the universe. It might have been, and I know it might be judged for, as being a heretic, but it might have been to a process similar to the Big Bang. That's not the point. The Big Bang Theory says it appeared by itself. This is what I don't agree with. I believe that God created matter. How and why? How? I don't know. Where from? We don't know. That's something you cannot discuss through science. It's also philosophy. But it's okay, because the Big Bang Theory has a lot of philosophy too. So no matter how the universe appeared, these elements still function today the same the way they do. And as I mentioned in the first lesson, the first presentation, look at Ben Carson. Ben Carson is a creationist, and still he's the best pediatric neurosurgeon that the United States had, and he does not believe in evolution. Why can he function as a successful surgeon if he doesn't believe in evolution? Why? Because evolution is inconsequential in medicine. It doesn't matter if you believe in evolution or not. So that's why I'm saying day-to-day science doesn't care about evolution. It is only origin science that cares about evolution. Hope I answered your questions. Any other question? Yes, Joseph?
From apologetics standpoint, you've said several times that the intelligent design would be the way of communication to those that don't believe in anything, no God,
No supernatural. Yeah.
So that would be the conversation
Yes.
that can draw them into seeing possibly that behind everything there might be a God.
Yeah, it opens the idea. Maybe he should have a mic. I don't know. Is the microphone there?
You are also saying that you believe it's God.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. How would you take somebody that comes maybe from a secular background or an atheistic background, and he or she reached the level where he or she can see something like intelligent design there, but then he or she may say, okay, so I'm fine with it. There must be something.
Yeah, flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah, the spaghetti. And it's fine. So now I know it. But your interest as a Christian, believing in God, the God of the Bible, you kinda would like to take that person one step further.
Yes.
So how would you take that person one step further?
Okay, thank you. I hope you understood the question. So the intelligent design doesn't talk about the identity of the creator, but once it opens the door. Once you get somebody open to the possibility of being a of a creator existing, how do you get them the next step to convincing them that Christianity, the God of Christianity, is a true God? Well, not in the science class. I can tell you that. Not in the science class. In the philosophy class, or in a discussion that I'm going to have about the Bible, then we need to talk about what the Bible means. I need to present to that person why I believe the Bible is the inspired word of God, because that person is at least now open to the idea that a God exists and might have a purpose for humans. Because I just showed through science that it is more likely that we have a creator than not. Now, let's talk about the identity of the creator. How are you going to do that? Only through a philosophical discussion. There's no way you can do it through science. I mean, through science, you can infer that this God must be very smart and very powerful. I mean, there are a few things that you can infer about that God from science. It can definitely not be this flying spaghetti monster, because that monster is probably not very bright and not very powerful, okay? So there are some things that you can infer from science that that God is. But again, from science, you will infer that that God is allowed evil or used evil to create. So then you need to correct that through philosophy and present to them a philosophical system that is most consistent with each other, with itself. And I believe that the most consistent with itself philosophical system is Christianity. We again do not have all the answers, but I believe we have the best answers compared to the other religions. One short example is the authenticity of the biblical narratives. All the other religious books present things very in black and white. You have the good people and the bad people. And the good people are always the people who follow the right God. Okay? The Bible is not like that. It presents things as they are. People are also all shades of gray. Even people who follow God, the Bible just describes them as they are. It doesn't take anybody's part. The heroes of the Bible are fallen heroes who are always rescued by God. So you see a level of authenticity in the biblical narratives that you do not see in any other religious texts. So it's a starting point. It's a different discussion of a different nature with a different methodology. But it's a starting point. Indeed, the intelligent design, it is the wedge. But it is the wedge of truth, in my opinion. It opens the mind to the idea that there might be a creator. Then we can discuss it. I'm not going to be able to show God to you if you reject it from the start. If you just don't believe it, I cannot use the same elements that I'm going to use. So I need to talk about intelligent design, open the table, open the possibility, put the possibility on the table. Then, once we accept that there might be a God, then we can talk again about who that God might be, but not in the science class. Hope I answered the question. Any other question? Yes, Mirela. Wait for the mic. We should have had that from the beginning.
You said that atheists don't have to deal with the problem of evil.
Yes.
How do they deal with the problem of evil?
Intellectually, I mean.
I'm sorry?
Intellectually, because they do deal with it on a day-to-day basis. You know, they do struggle with the problem of evil in their life. But intellectually, it doesn't pose a problem because they say evil exists because there is no God and nature is just what it is that produces evil. It's just random.
However, there are some moral laws that we established that are the right.
We make moral laws. That's how they say. They say, we make the moral laws, and those moral laws change. There is no absolute standard. We make the standard. That is the atheist philosophy about morality. Atheists do have a morality. Let's not make the mistake that all atheist people are immoral people. No, that's not true. There are many very moral atheists that just don't believe in God, and they have a different moral than we do, and the source for their moral is not the absolute God, it's just the societal convention. But there are moral people. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are really okay, but just as Christians, there are some Christians who are very immoral people. So that's not the point. The point is the source of the moral. In Christianity, we have an absolute source, God. In an atheistic system, it is us. We make morality, not according to what I like. It's what's best for the society. That's how morality is in an atheistic society. Hope I answered your question. Oh yes, Sebi, another question.
Last question.
Well, you can have as many as you want.
Okay.
I'm fine. I can do this until tomorrow. Not everybody, I know.
So this is a very long, complex situation.
Okay.
Okay. So if intelligent design is one of the plausible choices,
Okay.
would a version of theistic evolution that does not define evolution as something that occurs
Randomly,
randomly.
undirected.
Yeah, that does not like say, let's say God directed, or someone, the big spaghetti monster, directed the
Flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah, directed the
That's a real thing, by the way.
fish to come out of the water to turn into a land animal to later evolve into the modern human.
Okay.
Would that be acceptable?
I
by
understand your
intelligent
question.
Design standards.
I understand your question. Let me rephrase it. So he says, what if there are theistic evolutionists who don't believe evolution is undirected? They believe God directs evolution. The problem with that is no scientists accept that. If you're a theistic evolution, they never say that, because that becomes progressive creation. That's I mean, no, there's a technical difference. You know, for us it's the same because they're still false. For people who believe in the God of the Bible, it's still false, so it's the same, but it's not the same. For a scientist, that would be progressive creation, which is God makes an animal, it pushes it to evolve, then it stops. Wait, an impasse. Let's help it become a crocodile now. So it becomes a crocodile. So God leads the crocodile and becomes, whatever, you know, I'm just using an example. But that is not theistic evolution. By definition, that is not theistic evolution. Any theistic evolutionist would say just God started the process. It never guided it. However, it's a trick thing, because God, how do they put that? Loaded the universe with the laws that would have resulted in the creation of the human being, or something alike. So that's directed. You just made a very intricate Rube Goldberg design. You know those cartoons with the Rube Goldberg in those systems that, you know, there's a ball that falls into a glass, then it moves to a fork and it cuts those devices. That's what it would become. And that is why I say theistic evolution is a contradiction in terms. It cannot be a directed, undirected process. And by definition, evolution, in the sense that scientists understand it, is undirected. Okay, if there is no other questions, if there are no other questions, then this concludes our series. We have barely scratched the surface. If I am to start another series next week, we can talk about completely different topics that we haven't touched here, because there's so many that we can discuss. Hopefully we can do this in other formats that I'm not very sure of right now, but maybe we can continue this in shorter sessions, just to record it and broadcast online. But until then, I have had a great time sharing this information with you, and I'm really glad that you were able here to come and ask these questions about the programs that I have presented. I wish you all have a good night, and God bless each one of us within the search for truth. May we all find the truth. Have a good night.